Hey everyone, and welcome back to another Legion video. Today I'm going to be giving you a bit of a look at how the Retribution Paladin is going to play, and the changes to this spec are rather interesting. There's a little bit less of a focus on range stuff, that's one thing, and also it's a bit less proc dependent than it previously was, which from what I gather might be to the liking of some people who did not enjoy the Warlords of Draenor style of play that came with this spec. So, in this video we're not talking about raid performance or anything like that, we're talking about how it feels to play and whether it's fun. The first thing I'm going to do is give you a bit of a look through how it plays, then we're going to go through the talents, the abilities, and of course the artifact weapon, and then I'll bring it all together and show you a few of the different playstyles that are available with the current setup that Blizzard have got. So first of all, just to go over the main abilities, you've got Crusader Strike, 4.5 second cooldown, 1 holy power, does 20,000 damage. You've got Judgment. Now Judgment no longer gives you holy power, instead it does some damage to enemies, but more importantly, it causes enemies within 8 yards of the one that you strike to take 30% increased power from your holy power generators and consumers for 12 seconds. We then have Blade of Justice, 12 yard range, 12 second cooldown, strike an enemy with Blades of Justice dealing 31.5 thousand holy damage and giving you 2 holy power, which, I mean, technically it's still range, but it's not like it's exorcism and hammer spam. I suppose that's what they're going with. I mean, for the people who didn't like the fact that, you know, your exorcism and hammer, all that stuff could proc, which could proc other things, and there's just procs everywhere, especially once you got tier gear, what you're going to find is a good bit less of that going on. Now, it is important that I draw your attention to a few different things here. Specifically, actually the only thing I need to draw your attention to is Conviction. Your Crusader Strike and Blade of Justice have a 20% chance to generate 1 additional holy power. So with that covered, let's actually just see some gameplay. So we run in here, you know, we do our Judgment, we do Blade of Justice, which is absolutely your priority. And much like with how it plays currently, you just always want to ensure that all of your generators are off cooldown all of the time. And if you're in a situation where you have 4 holy power, and you then use an ability, if Conviction procs, you're technically going to lose a holy power, though we'd probably have to crunch the numbers to see whether it's actually worth just using your Templar's Verdict in order, and then, pausing or delaying your Blade of Justice so that you don't have that chance of actually wasting 1 holy power, because you, in that case, be generating 6 holy power. That's just a minor thing, though. So what we see here is that it is, well, it's a lot slower. It really is a lot slower like this. Do not worry, though, there is a setup of talents that actually does make it a lot faster, but by default, you can see it's a very slow spec to play currently. Now, if you have a faster rate of procs and happen to get lucky via that, then sure, it'll be a little bit faster, but overall, it's a pretty slow way of playing the game. Now, you always want to ensure that your Judgment debuff is up on a target whenever you do something big like Templar's Verdict. There is a talent which means that's no longer a problem, but what I have found is that for the most part, that's not really an issue with the way that the timings of all of these abilities work. I've just never had a problem, where I'm finding myself constrained by having to adhere to that debuff the Judgment has. And actually, as it turns out, that's because I had the Mass Judgment talent turned on, which doubles the duration of its effect. So if I was just to turn on, let's just say Judgments of the Bold, which is very much a passive, and I run in here and I do Judgment, you can see that buff is only lasting for 6 seconds. So without that talent, there will be a lot more skill in playing the spec, in that you will need to time up your Templar's Verdicts with your Judgment, such that whenever you use Judgment, you then do a Templar's Verdict, so that your Templar's Verdict has the benefit of that 30% or 40% with the talent increased damage from your holy power abilities. Though still, I think a lot of people are just going to turn on Mass Judgment, so that's not something that you just won't really have to think about. I'm going to run through the talents here, but really the lines that matter the most are, in my experience anyway, the 30 and 60 talents. They really do change how this plays. So anyway, let's just run through them. Execution Sentence. This hammer falls from the sky, does damage, accumulating in a final burst. 10-second cooldown, though. So right now, that was a pretty slow way of playing it. If I actually activate that, and I'm using Execution Sentence, and that's very much just another rotational ability. However, you will notice, though, that it's not involved in holy power whatsoever, so it's completely decoupled from this Judgment mechanic. So that does change up how the game plays a little bit. Let's move back though. We've got Terulion's Might. This is essentially a charge for paladins. You fling a blade of holy light at a target, dealing some damage every 2 seconds for 8 seconds within 8 yards. But if you use it a second time, and I'll just do that here, you actually charge. So there's Terulion's Light placed down. And if I hit it again, I'll actually charge over to it. However, you do note there that it doesn't have a visual currently. We've got Consecration, so you consecrate the land beneath you, doing just a whole bunch of damage over time. And it is an 8.9 second cooldown. It lasts for 8.9 seconds, so you can have pretty much 100% uptime. Onwards to the 30 tier, and this is where it really matters. So, the Fires of Justice increases damage done by Crusader Strike by 25%. Pretty dull. Here's the interesting one. Crusader Flurry. This replaces Crusader Strike with a new ability that does 22,000 damage and grants you 1 holy power. What's key there is that it has 3 charges, and it has a 3.95 second recharge, which you will note is pretty much half a second quicker than Crusader Strike. So, if you've got Crusader Flurry activated, you're going to be generating more holy power. You will also find that you'll be generating more holy power because it gives you more chances for your Conviction proc, which, just to remind you, if I hit P, Conviction gives you that 20% chance to generate an additional holy power, and I can confirm the Conviction does work with Crusader Flurry. Now, how does this change up the gameplay? Well, your absolute priority is using your Blades of Justice on cooldown. If you're ever in a situation where, as an example here, right, and I use the 3 of these, I can delay doing a Crusader Flurry for as long as I want. I mean, I'm not losing anything out now because I'm always generating. It's only if this is at 3 stacks that you're losing out. So that gives you a little bit more flexibility in how you play, and it actually does play into another key ability, which I'll get onto in a second. We then have Zeal. This is a 4.45 second cooldown, does 22,000 damage, and it gives you a stack of Zeal, which increases your attack speed by 20% and causes Zeal to chain to an additional nearby target per stack. I think this stacks up to 3 times in my experience, but essentially you'll be using Zeal on cooldown, and you generate stacks of Zeal, which give you a faster attack speed, which is going to speed things up a little bit. Pretty simple though. You just want to make sure that doesn't fall off its stacks, but frankly, I mean, it's if you let that fall off, then I don't know, you're doing something wrong. So that's Zeal. Let's move on to this tier. So this is a simple one. Fist of Justice. Your spells that consume holy power reduce the cooldown of Hammer of Justice by 10 seconds. That could be very useful maybe in PvP if you want to have, or just be able to use Fist of Justice, Hammer of Justice even a little bit more. We've got Repentance, so Meditation incapacitates the enemy target for 1 minute. Any damage other than Censor will awaken that target. And that is a 1.68 second cast, 15 second cooldown, 30 yard range. Then we've got Blinding Light, 2 minute cooldown, and it will dazzle enemies within 10 yards for 6 seconds. Let's get on to the 60 tier, which is cool. So Virtue's Blades increases the damage done by Blade of Justice by 25%, meaning that your Blade of Justice does 31,000 damage. If we move over to Blade of Wrath here, this will strike an enemy with the Blade of Wrath, dealing 20,000 holy damage and generating 1 holy power. It's got a 5.93 second cooldown, and if you look at Blade of Justice here, it is 11.9, so roughly the same. However, this does more damage per... You could say this does more damage per second, in that if you do 2 of these within 12 seconds, it will have done more damage than if you just did 1 of the Virtue's Justice Blade of Justices. From what the numbers here say, every 12 seconds. That might sound a bit confusing, but basically, if you select this talent and are able to use it on cooldown, you'll be doing more damage. Now, this plays into Crusader Flurry. So to explain how this works, basically, Blade of Wrath is your absolute, it's the thing you always want to do. But say you're in that situation where using Crusader Flurry will make it so that the GCD is activated, so you'll actually be delaying your Blade of Wrath by just a tiny amount of time. Well, because you've got Crusader Flurry, and they can pull up to 3 charges, you're in a situation where you pretty much never, ever have to delay your Blade of Wrath. So let's just wait. Now, you can just see that using that Crusader Flurry there delayed my Blade of Wrath because of the GCD. Because of the way this is set up, though, if I was to use this, and right now, I can just wait for as long as I want, do other things, and use Blade of Wrath, and because this is going to be pulling up, it means I'm never delaying this, and I can, you know, as soon as I've used this, maybe use 2 of these. Basically, it means that if you play it right, you're not really losing out on any time or resources. Now, when I was doing that gameplay there, I was obviously capping Holy Power. That's just because I want to explain this effect. And if you have these 2 abilities active, and I'll just go through some gameplay here, if you've got the 2 of them active, what you're going to find is that it is a drastically faster to play spec. Now, that is personally to my liking. It might not be to the liking of some others, and I'm actually fucking up my Blades of Wrath there. But still, I think it's a lot more fun this way. It's just more fast-paced and interesting to me. Again, personal choice. And what I like about the way this is set up is it actually does allow for a good amount of personal choice in how you build up your Retribution Paladin. If you preferred the Warlords of Draenor style, then perhaps a setup like this is going to be preferable to you. However, if you want a slower style that is less about just crazy procs and things going on all the time in a high APM sort of playstyle, then you can just choose the other talents. It'll probably be easier to play, it probably won't do as much DPS overall, but if that's what you like, it's totally an option. We've also got Divine Hammers. Now this just causes hammers to spin around you. Using this generates 1 Holy Power, replaces Blade of Justice, and the hammers will do damage to things within 8 yards. So if I just hit this, you can see I basically do like a miniature Divine Storm every once in a while. And that will just continue going on for 8 seconds. Moving on to the Judgments, we've got Judgments of the Bold. This increases the damage bonus effect of your Judgments by 10%, meaning it's 40% up from 30%. We've got the Might of Virtue. Your Judgment ability generates 1 Holy Power. So if you've got Blade of Wrath, Crusader, Flurry, and that, then you've just got so much Holy Power. And then we've got Mass Judgment. Your Judgment spell affects all enemies within 8 yards of the target and increases the duration by 100%. So the duration of the debuff from Judgment will last for 12 seconds, and the cooldown of Judgment is 12 seconds, meaning you have 100% uptime of being able to do 30% increased damage with your Holy Power generators and spenders. Overall, I think this one's going to result in the higher numbers, even though something like Judgments of the Bold would take more skill and timing to use, so I'm not sure how that really is overall. Moving on, we've got Blaze of Light. This is just a new heal. It's essentially a souped up flash of light that does more healing, essentially. We've got Divine Steed, summons a holy charger to ride for 4 seconds, and it increases your movement speed by 100% for 4 seconds, can be used indoors or in combat. Then there's An Eye for an Eye, 3 Holy Power, instantly counterattack any enemy that strikes you in melee for 12 seconds. Melee attacks made from behind cannot be counterattacked, maximum of 10 counterattacks. That just seems like more of a PvP or you're out soloing in the world thing, and less of something that you're going to be using in a raiding environment. On to the final tier, Final Verdict, increases damage done by Templar's Verdict by 15%. A Seal of Light, 3 Holy Power, draws upon the Paladin's Holy Energy to increase movement speed by 35%, and attack speed by 35 and movement speed by 15, lasts for 30 seconds. So that's a nice little buff that costs 3 Holy Power. And I suppose that's harking back to things like, say, Seraphim or whatever it used to be all the way back in Mists of Pandaria, where you had a form of buff that cost Holy Power to use. And then finally, Holy Wrath, 3 Holy Power, channeled 25-yard range. You fire bolts of Holy Power at the target, which deal some damage and restore health, and it does 50% additional damage to stunned targets. So I'll just show you what that looks like here. So I'll just run up, get myself some Holy Power. Oh, there we go. Okay, and I shall run back, and we'll use Holy Wrath. Right now, I assume they've got an animation that needs to be thrown in there. As far as the rest of your abilities go, it's mostly similar, but they've changed up some blessings. So, if you look at this, Blessing of Might places a blessing on an ally that causes their attacks to have a 10% chance to deal 30% additional damage as holy. You may only have 3 total active blessings of King's, Might, or Blessings of Wisdom, so each Paladin can bless 3 targets. I wonder if that means people will want to stack Paladin so you get like maximum coverage of that. I'm not the biggest fan of this way of doing blessings. It just seems like more busy work. So Blessing of Might is that damaging effect. Blessing of Wisdom places a blessing on a target that gives them 1% maximum mana every 15 seconds, and you've got the chance, when damage is being taken, to be healed for 5% of maximum mana, and then Blessing of Kings gives you an absorb shield for 6,000 damage that is refreshed to its full strength every 6 seconds. So that's what's going on with blessings. A little bit odd, honestly. We've got Blessing of Protection, though. 5-minute cooldown places a blessing on a party or raid member, protecting them from all physical attacks for 10 seconds. So that's pretty much the same. Avenging Wrath increases all damage and healing by 50% for 20 seconds. I think that's up from 20%, so that's certainly a lot more powerful. We've got Hammer of Justice, that's just 1-minute cooldown, 10-yard range, stuns for 6 seconds. Hand of Hindrance, 25-yard range, 30-second cooldown, places a hand on the enemy target, reducing movement speed by 70% for 10 seconds. Then we've got Hand of Light, so this is 1-minute cooldown, 25-yard range, places a hand on an enemy target, healing you for 3% every time that target takes damage, up to once per second, and if the target dies when that hand is active, you will heal for 40%. That could be really nice just if you're going through the world in terms of your sustain. I suppose if you didn't want to have to stop and heal yourself up with, with Holy Light or something. Or Flash of Light, even. And then we've got Lay on Hands, so that just heals up a friendly target for an amount equal to your maximum health. Can't be used on targets with Forbearance. Then there is Rebuke. This interrupts spellcasting and prevents any spell in that school from being cast again for 4 seconds. We've got Shield of Vengeance, creates a barrier of Holy Light that absorbs 23,000 damage for 15 seconds. When the barrier is consumed or expired, all damage absorbed is dealt back to your current melee target as holy damage. So that is a very interesting ability, actually. I guess not as useful in raids if you're not taking damage, but maybe useful in other contexts. And then that's pretty much it. Templar's Might, or Templar's Verdict, is essentially the same. Moving on to the artifact weapon, it's got a chance when you do Judgment, a 35% chance to cause 4 weapons of the light to smash your target, which is just basically some free damage. The actual ability that you get is Wake of Ashes. You call the Ashbringer down on your target, it does a whole bunch of damage, and snares enemies within 8 yards of it by up to 50% based on their distance from the center of impact. It's got an additional effect on undead and demons, causing them to be stunned for 10 seconds if struck by Wake of Ashes. We've then got a whole bunch of traits which just basically increase all your main stuff's damage by like 3% per tick, or per point you put in. The most interesting one is Endless Resolve. Forbearance no longer applies to you, so you could do your bubble and a Lay on Hands on yourself, and you'd be totally fine. In terms of the main ones though, Blades of Light. This causes your Blade of Justice to now cause Blades of Light to strike the target for an additional 1 to 3 times. We've then got Echo of the High Lord. Whenever you use Templar's Verdict or Divine Storm, Ashbringer will mimic that action. And finally we move on to Divine Tempest. Ashbringer will cause your Divine Storm to quickly move 20 yards in front of you, doing damage to anyone within its path, and its damage is also increased by 20%. So that is pretty much it for the Retribution Paladin. Overall, I think it's got changes that a lot of people are going to like. I know I didn't do the best job of explaining this whole Blades of Wrath and Crusader Flurry thing, but I hope you get my point there. Essentially, when this is something that you can pull up, it means you can just let it generate while you deal with other things, such as timing your judgments right and ensuring the Blade of Wrath is always on cooldown. As long as this is never at 3 stacks, you always want it to be generating something. But overall, it's just, you build up your holy power, you spend your holy power. That's essentially it. It's similar enough, and it should definitely feel quite familiar to anyone who is acquainted with the current playstyle. Anyway, guys, that's it for me. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.